Thank you so much for having me. No, I'm very well. I remember our last chat. I was in a slightly different place at Abbey Hall's parents' place in Phoenix, and I'm now in Teen in the French Alps. Yeah, so no, thank you for having me back.
Two amazing training locations. Where I want to start this conversation is actually with some of your personal history. I'm familiar with sort of that barroom bet story that led to you doing Marathon des Sables, but I didn't realize until recently that, back when you were in the military, you actually had the chance to go to Kenya. I think it was in 2015 or 2016. And when you were off duty, I think you made the drive over to Iten and sort of soaked up the running scene there. Can you talk about how that ultimately played a part in influencing the move into pro ultra running?
Yeah, I think they're probably very closely related, but also at the same time completely separate. So I was in Kenya in 2015 and 16 with the military, and yeah, I had time off, and I had no reason to come back to the UK, so I thought, oh well, I'll stay in Kenya. So I drove. It's probably like a 6-7 hour drive, and thinking about doing it now, I would never do it. But like a 6-7 hour drive part way across Kenya, going through these small towns, and I doubt the locals had ever seen a sight like it. Yeah, and yeah, you were sort of being pointed at and sort of not shouted at, sort of not cheered, but like people were excited to see you, and because they'd probably never seen a guy on his own, who looked like me, in those sort of tiny villages. But that was very cool. And yeah, so I spent 2 weeks in Iten, staying at the high altitude training center. I was into running and I ran to stay fit, but it was never it was never a big thing for me. But I thought, well, I'm here. What an incredible opportunity to be able to go and do something that I enjoy as a hobby, but get to do it with the best people in the world. So I read a couple of books, and yes, I've decided E10 would be an incredible place to go, and I'll learn a lot, and I'll learn a lot about myself. So yeah, I spent 2 weeks up there. Ultimately, that was sort of probably the catalyst for me starting to take running a little bit more seriously. But didn't race off the back of it. Didn't do anything like that. Sort of learned a lot. Didn't have a training plan. I would sort of just see what everyone else was doing, and I'd just jump in with them. And typically, it would. Kirsty, someone who was Australian, who she's raced in the 100K World Champs a couple of times, but she was also big into, I think it's like speed golf, where you basically play your shots and then you run as quickly as you can to where you hit the ball and you keep going. And she was up there with one of the best in the world in this incredibly niche sport. So I ended up doing quite a lot with her.
Wow.
But yeah, it was just super interesting, and I think that sort of has probably definitely the catalyst to get me to start thinking about taking running more seriously, and I guess still have incredibly fond memories of being in E10, and I've spent 2 years, pretty much 2 years of my life in Kenya. With the military, and then actually after my wife and I got married, we then went back to Kenya for our honeymoon. There wasn't quite as much running. It was a very nice honeymoon, but it was incredibly fond memories, and it's now really cool to see that there is some trail running happening out of E10, and I think it's an incredible place for training. There are some big climbs. It actually reminds me a lot of Flagstaff, sort of the terrain and the sorts of trails. I guess it's a mixture of Flagstaff and Boulder. You've got the Flagstaffy trails, but then you've also got the dirt roads of Boulder. So I think you periodized a really nice training block together, I think you could pretty much train for everything, maybe with the exception of an alpine race, a 100-mile alpine race. But I think anything else, it would be an amazing place to train.
One more thing on sort of the topic of the military. I've heard you say before that when it comes to pro running, in that environment, you are training to perform your best when you're feeling your best. But from your military background, you can lean on training to perform at a high level when you're feeling your worst, which I think is brilliant. I'm sure there are a lot of examples to reference, but can you look back on your military training and think of any drills you went through or environments they were putting you in that facilitated that resilience that you can kind of relate to getting ready for something like UTMB?
Yeah, for sure. I think like you take any military exercise or operation, and the dangerous stuff and the sexy stuff, I guess, tends to happen at the end of a campaign. You've got to get there first, whether that's like, and we'll do in the military, you do heaps and heaps of rehearsals to make sure that you're fully ready and you know sort of the team dynamics and the tactics that you're implementing for that operation or that exercise. So you're running through that thousands of times. It's becoming like clockwork. It's similar to running training. You spend so much time training, and actually the races are fairly short. Like I take UTMB, for example. I've had a touch wood an almost perfect 12-week build up where I've run more than the distance of UTMB every single week. Whereas for this, now I'm just going to do in one day. I've done so many more miles than I'm going to in training than I am going to race in. And it's sort of almost become, a little bit of second nature now. Or you take an operation on its own that, like, you're in the UK, we'd call it tabbing, but in the US, you'd call it rucking where you're carrying heavy weight, you're really tired, and you get to sort of the form up point or the place where you're about to start the fighting where people's lives are at risk. And you might have already been on your feet for 8 hours hiking in. And then you've got to go and perform at your very, very best because lives are at risk. I wasn't in any environments like that, but in training, that's what we were replicating. So when I come into ultra running, I think it's like people sort of say, the ability to be able to leave Courmayeur with a smile on your face and be like, and there's I actually just listened to a podcast recently with a guy who was in the Royal Marine Commandos, so I guess similar to like a tier 2 Navy SEAL equivalent. And one of their ethos is cheerfulness in the face of adversity. So basically being able to smile when the chips are down and things are rough, but being able to be like, still be happy and still put a smile on your face. And I think that's something that we've seen Courtney Dauwalter do incredibly. And she's done it without realizing she's doing it at the time. But like it's a really strong way to live your life. And I think if you can implement that into training, then I think you're onto a winning formula. Is Courtney being happy the reason why she's the absolute boss at ultra distance trail running? No, but does it play a small percent of it? 100%.
Moving on to UTMB, I'm not sure if this was a few months after the race last year. It could have been a bit more recently this year. I know I heard you talk about it somewhere, but you basically said something along the lines of, I wish there was someone, or I wish there was at least more people in my corner who had told me ahead of time to maybe pump the brakes, to reconsider lining up for UTMB, to soak in that win at Western States more. Basically someone who was less like, I don't know if sycophantic is the word, but at least someone who wasn't afraid to be brutally honest with you and sort of realistic about your readiness for that race. Can you get a bit more into that here? Because I think it's a really interesting lesson for any elite athletes out there like yourself.
Yeah, I think it's very easy when things are going well to get greedy, and to think that you can keep performing well and sort of just keep building and building and building. And it was a it's a lofty goal. It's been done once before on the men's side by Killian in 2011. Something that I've only recently found out. I didn't start running until 2017. 2011 seemed like an incredibly long time ago, and I didn't realize Killian had done it. But I think the sport, and not taking anything away from him, the sport has definitely changed since 2011, and I think he would probably be the first person to admit that. Needless to say, it's still an incredible feat, and I think it was such a lofty goal, and I've not always achieved my goals necessarily, but always been pretty close in achieving them, or had good races. And like, I take my Western States progression, I was third at States at 19, and then I won it, and then at CCC in 2017 I was fourth, and then 2018 I won it, and then at UTMB in 2022 I was third. So I was like, oh well, I'm gonna win. This is my trajectory, is to finish either just on the podium or just off the podium, and then I learn the lessons and then I win them. But what I forgot to do was, I thought the training had been pretty good, but actually I recently the last session that I've had with my psychologist, sort of to give me a bit of confidence going into this race, she said, right, just write down all the stats of sort of the numbers that people like to hear, like your running volume, the running distance, your vert, and the time that you've spent running for 2022, 2023, 2024 in the last 12 weeks. And I can't remember the exact figures, but it was almost the vertical that I climbed in 2023 was almost, it's less than half of the vertical that I climbed in 2022 and 2024. I was unprepared. I hadn't done the work. And I think I just thought, oh, my Western States training is going to carry me through. Like, I'm really fit. I'm in the shape of my life. But the specificity in these days where you have to bring, if you want to win these races, you have to bring your 100%. 85, 90% is no longer good enough. And rightfully so. The sport has changed. And I think, I wish I had someone to say, and there probably were people who said, oh, have you thought about maybe not doing it? And I probably sort of just brushed it away and thought, oh, come on, like, I'll be fine. I've just had a race of my life at Western States, and I'm sort of still riding off the coattails of that. I'll be fine. And UTMB is there are lots of great things about it. There are lots of things that definitely aren't perfect with it, and there's a lot of room for improvement for it. But a lot of the time it's the athletes who make the mistakes. There was one athlete last year who did no media for UTMB. Yeah. Is that the reason why Jim won UTMB? No. But again, is it a factor that influenced what he's doing? Yes. And are you going to see a lot of the top men this year? Are UTMB going to interview any of the top men this year? I'd be amazed if any of the ranked top 5 did a single interview with UTMB. Because why would you? If Jim can get away with not doing it, an event that's sponsored by Hoka, and Jim's like, right, actually my performance comes first, well, why would you risk anything else? Like, the sport is getting more professional, and Jim is definitely at the forefront of doing things for himself and for his performance, and that's bringing the sport on even more. And sometimes it takes one athlete doing things one way and another athlete doing things another way, and people can see, oh well, that works. Why would you not do that? It just seems so logical. Why would you go and do media when you're 2 days away from your race? You're not contracted to do any media. You're not being paid to do it. Why would, in any other walk of life, you would never do it 2 days before the most important day of the most important race of your year? So there's last year I did all the media and I did everything because I thought it was really cool, and it was amazing to be ranked in the top couple at UTMB, and a huge honor and privilege. Whereas this year I look at the list and yeah, cool, where I'm ranked, great. It's kind of irrelevant where you're ranked before the race. The only thing that really matters is where you're ranked after the race.
So many follow-up questions. I do want to get into the media stuff in just a second, but coming back to something you said earlier about being greedy, I want to touch on that. And even though I'm just a fan of the sport, I do understand that if you want to perform well, you have to be selective. But where I don't know the exact answer is how do we define selectivity? Like right now, the UTMB Western double is all the rage. You just mentioned that we're in this era now because we're professionalizing so quickly that 85 to 90% is not going to cut it to be successful at both. Do you think we're trending towards a period of the sport where athletes of your caliber can't even consider a summer with both of those races involved because it's so taxing even to nail just one of them?
I think for everyone, in my opinion, if you've won both of them before, you've got a far better chance of being able to win both of them in the same year. I can't imagine there are many athletes who would have an interview before the race and say, do I want to win UTMB? Of course I do. Do I think I'm the favorite? No. Am I my favorite? No. Like, I think, in my opinion, Jim's the one who, he is the outright favorite going into the race. It's his race to lose, is my view. Like, I think if he has a good day, I think he's going to win. Even if I have my best day, I think Jim is, I can admit these things to myself now. I think he has improved so much, not physically necessarily. I'm sure he has improved physically, but the way that he has improved into becoming an all-round mountain athlete is, I feel I'm a couple of years behind him. He did his first UTMB in 2017 or 2018, whereas I did mine in 2022. I am, hopefully following in similar sort of shoes and footsteps and trying to sort of professionalize myself first and foremost, and then the sport to follow. Does that mean that I'm not going to do absolutely everything in my power to try and beat Jim on the day? Yes, but do I think the way to beat Jim is to try and front run the race? No. Who knows what the weather's going to do? Who knows what stomachs are going to do? But for me, it's I see myself as a bit of an underdog coming into the race, and I think that's not a bad place to be. Like, I couldn't be more confident in my training. I couldn't have done anything else this year. Like, it's not a coincidence that I raced the cross country world championships in March. I know, it's not a coincidence that I then slowly build up and raced Lavaredo as that was my second week in the mountains in the whole year. And seeing the improvement from Lavaredo to now, and seeing the times on climbs in Iten, I've been in Iten for the last 3 years, seeing the improvement in like similar heart rate, similar effort, it's 10-12% faster. Who knows? It's 100 miles is I know I can get to Courmayeur feeling good in 8.5, 8 hours 40, which I think is what it's going to take to be in the front group, because nowadays if you want to win the race, you need to be in the front group. I think there'll be people who are outside the top 10 who will finish top 5, but I now think how competitive the sport is, you've got to be able to run an 8:40 from Chamonix to Courmayeur and then finish without slowing down too much. But I don't think it's possible to come back from outside the top 10 and finish on the podium. So these are the new metrics that we've got to work with, and this is assuming that the weather's good. I think this year for me it's been a little bit of a different approach, and Scott Johnson, my coach, is a saying of, if you train like everyone else, expect the same results as everyone else. like there's no one else. I can't imagine there is anyone else at UTMB who has ever raced the cross country world championships, let alone 6 months before UTMB. Does that guarantee you a good race? Absolutely not. Is it specific? No. But what it gives you, one, it's race tactics. You're racing against people who are so much better than you, yet you're still able to finish within 2 minutes of the greatest off-road 10K runners in the world. Like, that gives me so much confidence that I can do that. I can win Western States. I can finish top 3 at UTMB. Trail running is it's not like road cycling where you don't need that many skills. That you need so many different skills in trail running: uphill, downhill, nutrition, technical terrain, what happens when it starts raining, what happens when it's slippery, how easy is it to access my gloves, the layering systems. All of this is far more important in a race like UTMB. So the physical element doesn't matter quite so much. It's sort of becoming a master of your trade, but with so many different skills. And I think, sort of coming back full circle, I think that's where Jim won UTMB last year, was not through his training necessarily, but becoming a master of his craft. And I guess that's what I've not tried to replicate this year, but it's definitely, you're not winning a UTMB off talent alone. The person who's prepared the best is the person who is going to win, and absolutely no doubt that was Jim last year. And whether it will be this year or not, I'm good friends with Jim, and I really hope that we can have an incredible race similar to 2022, and I'm sure he hopes that we have a race like 2023. And also that's not mentioning any of the other guys who are in the race, and the winner's probably going to come from somewhere outside of that. But I think it's going to be an incredibly exciting year nonetheless.
Maybe 2 comments that form some sort of a question. Number 1, I would assume that, you look at Jim's circumstances, wins Western States earlier this year, 14:13 and change, whatever the exact time was. I have to imagine he's still feeling that in his legs. I have to imagine to some extent he's a little banged up. I have to imagine he is representative of that sort of 85 to 90% ready for this race picture you were painting. So I'm surprised that you consider him the front runner, given that. I mean, obviously he has the history here, amazing. He's defending his title, so he deserves it. But I feel like he fits into that mold. The second thing is, I look back to 2022 when you famously were a few months coming off of a pretty significant knee surgery. You teamed up with Zach Miller. You're hunting in the second half in that last 50K. You passed Jim on the final climb up to La Flégère, and sort of wondering if you take confidence from that. So I know those are 2 separate comments, but given Jim's status after Western, given the history you have, even dating back to just relatively recently, 2 years ago, being able to compete with him, how do you square all that?
I think 100-mile race, you roll the dice. Everyone's gonna have highs, everyone's gonna have lows, and it just so happened when I timed my race right in 2022, whether that was by luck or by judgment or somewhere a little bit in the middle. But when Zach faded, I picked up, and at exactly the same time, that's when Jim had his final fade, but still managed to hold it together really well. So I think it's going to be a really interesting race dynamic. Jim is in the race field. I think Jim's the only one, except maybe Pau Capel as well, who have won on the men's side, who knows what it feels like to have the perfect, not necessarily the perfect day, but to get back into Chamonix first. And there's been people who have come close. We've got people at least one person who's come second, at least 2 people who've come third. So I think there is a lot of experience and a lot of people who have run it in different ways before. So I think there will be yeah, I think it will make a really interesting race dynamic. And yeah, my race tactics, without giving too much away, won't be to time trial. I think, yeah, mental fortitude and being able to perform my best when I'm feeling my worst. The time that you make up in the first half of the race, you more than double lose in the second half. I think if I run 10 minutes slower in the first half, 15 minutes slower in the first half, I reckon I can run 30 minutes quicker in the second half, giving you an overall time that's a bit quicker. But I think at the same time, do you want to find yourself isolated at night, running on your own, not really knowing what pace you're running? Is it better to team up with someone like I did with Zach, and that worked really nicely, but that could have gone the other way and Zach and I finished 4th and 5th, as opposed to 3rd and 5th. So like, yeah, you just don't really know. And I think you can do a lot of planning before and sort of plan your what if this happens, what if that happens. But I think at the end of the day, you've got to make those decisions. You've got to be confident enough to be able to make those decisions on the ground right in front of you when you're 10, 15 hours into the race and you're really tired, but you make the right decision. And I think for me, that's probably the biggest lesson that I learned in the military. It's being able to make the right decision and not necessarily feel sorry for myself, but when the chips are down and I'm feeling rubbish, being able to smile, not take myself too serious and be like, right, come on, clip your poles back in and let's get digging into this pain cave. Let's just keep going. I think, and be able to make that decision and being able to stay present in the moment and think, right, well, I feel terrible. Like, well, why do I feel terrible? Oh, well, because it's raining and I've not put my rain jacket on, or I've got a wet t-shirt. Okay, cool. Let's change that. Let's see what I can do to try and optimize things on the ground. And I think, yeah, being in the military, that's a very transferable skill that you can only practice in adversity. And yes, you can practice that in the mountains on long days and practice these things. But I think, yeah, doing it people say sort of train hard, fight easy, and it's definitely not the case because the race itself is still really hard. But if you can put yourself in harder training conditions that may not be necessarily 100% specific, but a long hike into a live firing exercise where there is real jeopardy is significantly more in the dark without a headlamp is significantly more difficult than running on a really nice trail with a group of mates with a headlamp on.
Coming back to the media discussion, which I find fascinating, maybe because I'm involved in it. But you mentioned that, like, Jim Walmsley, great example. He went totally media dark in the week leading up to the race. I think yourself, a lot of people were impressed by that and maybe saw some of the recovery or performance benefits. What do you think because we're, roughly 2 weeks from race day, what do you anticipate the 6 to 7 days pre-race looking for you from an engagement standpoint, if you had to guess?
Zero. I'll do the elite athlete presentation in Chamonix on the Wednesday. That is the only bit of engagement that I will do between now. I think I've got one more podcast to do that got booked in 2 weeks ago, and that's on Friday this week. So a week before, I then don't arrive into Chamonix until I will get dropped off on our way from Iten to our chalet in Chamonix on Wednesday at 4. I'll drop in 4 p.m. I'll do the elite presentation for an hour. I'll then walk over to the bib collection at 5 o'clock, collect my bib, get a lift back to my apartment, and then that's me until race day. I think having done it both ways, I think it is so draining. It's so, you end up getting so in your head during those talks, and you're seeing lots of people, you're spending a lot of energy, and you've not got an unlimited amount of energy. I want it all for the trails, and whether that's selfish, and I've slightly pissed off some of my partners by saying no, but I guess my view on it is, what is better for you guys? Me having my best possible race, or me jeopardizing 12 months of preparation to sign a couple of babies' foreheads and take some selfies? Yes, that's the community, but I think let's do those things outside of racing. Let's do those. Why don't we do an amazing media event on the Sunday after the race, regardless of what happens? Get people in. People don't want to hear about the preparation. People want to hear about the race. Yeah. The preparation's kind of standard, and you can talk about that before the race or after the race. But why we're obsessed with doing big long media days in the 2 days before the biggest event of your year, or however you want to look at it, it wouldn't happen in any other sport, and so I don't really know why we let it happen in ours. So yeah, this year with my management agency, all of the photo shoots and everything for UTMB was done last week over 2 days. And it was so good because I could just do my own training and they followed along, and that's it. Anything else, any other requests that come in, it's well, we're really sorry. Tom doesn't arrive to Chamonix until Wednesday. Sadly, he can't be at a media thing on Tuesday. He can't release this product, but let's do something after the race. And I guess the difficult thing, even if you're really strict and you don't do any media, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to win the race. That's sport. You can optimize everything, but you just don't know. And I guess that's the tricky part. It's is it all worth it or is it not? Because you don't know, but you've got to do what you think is right and trust your gut with it. And yeah, when your gut's saying one thing and your head's saying the exact same thing, you can't go against both. So yeah, I think I'm approaching it approaching race week far more seriously, but far more relaxed at the same time. And by serious, I don't mean not smiling. I mean that I'm not going to be wasting my energy on things that I don't deem to be as important as the race itself, or I'm not going to say anything that I can't say after the race.
Going a little deeper on this, and maybe this question is more related to your own personal consumption on race week. And also this was a gem I felt from your ultrasound podcast. You mentioned a study that was showing the difference in elite performance of scrolling social media on their phones versus not scrolling social media on their phones in the hours leading up to a key performance. For listeners and viewers that aren't in the know, can you go into some detail about this study and whether it's influenced your day of or like 24 to 48 hours pre-race?
100%. I can't remember the exact details of the study, but it was basically two sets of professional cyclists, one who had phones, one who didn't have phones, and were on social media in the 3 hours leading up to the race as they normally would be, scrolling through irrelevant posts, seeing things about performance, seeing other people's interviews, whatever it was, ended up performing it. Yeah, it was around 10% worse compared to what their benchmark was Whereas the athletes who didn't have a phone and read a book or did some sort of mindfulness, visualization, things like that, performed like 7% better than their benchmark. So I think it was like a 13% difference in performance through not being on social media. And 13% isn't a marginal gain. If someone told you, here you go, if you delete Instagram off your phone, like for me, it will be my social media race plan, performance plan is I'll go on a little bit this week, but from Monday next week, I've not got it. Not on my phone. My wife is becoming my social media manager as well as 101 million other things because I don't want to see it. And if does not having it is that going to increase my performance by 13%? I'd love it to, but I very much doubt it will. That seems a little bit too good to be true. But will it get rid of some anxiety? Will it get rid of some pre-race nerves? Will it conserve energy? Will I be way more present and be able to do the things that I need to do in order to optimize my mental performance in the race? 100%. And if you look at performers in another podcast I've just listened to with Dame Jessica Ennis, who won heptathlon in 2012, she said that even in her event, that's a very skill-based event, it was 80% mental, 20% physical. And you hear you can't put a finger on the exact numbers in ultra running, but everyone says that the mental toughness and the mental resilience is more important than the physical. So my view of having scrolling through Instagram in the morning of the race, it's almost like every minute you're scrolling through social media is an extra minute that you're running in race week. And you wouldn't think, I'm going to add in another 5 miles here or 10 miles there. Before you know it, you've been on your phone for 4 hours over the week. It's like you're running. It's probably using as much energy, if not more. And when people say that ultra running is 80% mental, you're exercising your mind in a way that isn't beneficial, and it's like getting to Chamonix, getting super excited, running the VK a couple of times in race week. That's not going to be beneficial for your race if you're racing a 100-miler.
I'm sure there are people who will be listening to this interview and they will say, Tom, that sounds amazing. Now I'm wondering, how do you plan to pass that time? Monday of race week, Tuesday of race week, Thursday of race week, Wednesday, except for that, brief media appearance. How do you fill that space and not go crazy?
I think if you have the distraction, it's really easy to do. But if you don't have the distraction, then it's not difficult. I'll read a book. I've restarted doing visualization and doing it properly. Like I've written myself a script and recorded it and things with my psychologist that I've been practicing. I'm a secret Nintendo Switch player. I will probably play a little bit of Nintendo Switch. And we've got our dogs out here with us. I'll do normal things, play cards, check over my kit. Before I leave team to go to Chamonix, all of my bags of nutrition will be packed. Everything will be ready to go. So we'd have done our crew meeting, we'd have done everything. So in the days before the race, we can just completely relax. I'll watch some stuff on Netflix. I'll just relax and I'll be really present. I've got an amazing group of friends and family again coming out this year. The co-host for the Ultrasound podcast, Brett, is coming out. One of the other ushers at my wedding's coming out. My wife will be there, Sophie, our 2 dogs. Just being with friends and family, and like my mum and my dad are out as well. And being with friends and family I'd so much rather do that than be on my phone anyway. So it's really simple. And if you don't give yourself the distraction, and as long as you're not missing out on things that you should be doing, yes, there will need to be social media posts during race week, but I don't have to do that. There's no way that Jim did that last year. There's no way that he's on Instagram. If you want to professionalize it, then I think that's the best way. Do you really think that Eliud Kipchoge is doing his race day Instagram post? Or do you think he's actually thinking he's got bigger fish to fry and he wants to focus on the performance because, your best possible performance is going to speak way louder than an Instagram post that gets 3,000 likes. Great. Who cares? Because tomorrow it'll be forgotten, but your race performance won't.
I'm sure you've thought about this, but it's just spinning through my mind now. And I'm really fixated on that 13 or, 10%, 13% swing in performance. I have to imagine that if they did more studies, it wouldn't just be race related. It would affect any workout, any long run, any aspect of the training block. So it makes me wonder, and I'd be curious to get your take here. Where is the place for pro athletes like yourself to be interfacing with social media at all? Because it seems like at any point in time, you are making a pretty significant mental trade-off.
100%. And I think you are obliged to do social media and you do need to have a media presence. And I think it is really important because trail running is growing from the ground up. It is about the community. And I've loved doing our podcast this year and I really like doing the YouTube things and it's brilliant. But we finished recording the podcast episodes 6 weeks ago. We recorded every single podcast before they came out. So when it's very nice, people sending in suggestions. Have you thought about doing an episode like this? And I say, yeah, it'd be great. But we've recorded all of them. But what typically happens is when you do media like this and you make a big effort with your media, you might get 10 great comments and then one negative comment, and the only comment that you remember is the negative one. And it's like, guys, I'm trying. I won't put it out then. I won't do any media. I won't do a podcast. I won't do a YouTube series. I won't share any lessons that I've learned because it's not worth it. So I think there is definitely a time and a place for social media, but you need to be super comfortable with it. But at the same time, I definitely think that there is a trade-off between time spent scrolling through social media and how that's affecting you as an individual, as an athlete. And that's not just for pro runners, that'd be for everyone. And it definitely, I think the more time you spend on things that aren't real, like social media, the harder it is to get into so-called flow state where you're really present. So I think, and that's what everyone's trying to achieve. It's where things feel effortless and you go on some runs and you feel incredible. And then other runs, you run for 10 minutes and you think, how on earth am I ever going to run 100 miles? I can't even run for 2 miles. And there probably is a correlation between how you've spent your day and what you've done, whether you've sort of just procrastinated. And so, definitely far more aware. And there are things that you can do. Like if you've got an iPhone, like you can put a limit on your social media timings. You can put an hour or however long you want on to these social media things, because if you go on it, brilliant. But if you don't, the world's probably not going to end. So I think there's definitely a balance. You need to do some things. I'm contractually obliged to do some things because it is all about marketing and it's about brands and your own brand. But at the same time, what's going to speak louder, like I said, an Instagram post pre-race or an interview with you post-race after I share my training secrets about UTMB? Not that there are any real training secrets at all. It's pretty standard stuff. But what's more beneficial to the shareholders and my partners? Everyone would probably agree that it's a good performance.
Couple training questions. When you said earlier, if you train like everyone else, expect similar results, that struck something in me. And you also mentioned the racing the cross country world champs. That is something that probably very few, if any, of your competitors have done. It kind of puts you at a unique standpoint heading into the race. I was in prep for this episode. I was listening to a conversation you had with Scott Johnson. I think it was on his Evoke podcast. And he basically had another interesting idea that 100% sport specificity or 100% race specificity in training isn't necessarily the best. And like, I think he said something like, if you can do 25% grade on a treadmill, don't worry. Like, you can definitely also do 25% grade in the mountains. And I'm curious, because I don't know if you had weighed in on it. Do you agree with that? And like, do you feel like the trade-offs you make there are worth it?
Yeah, I think for me, if you only train 100%, if you train specifically 100% of the time, you're just lowering your ceiling. Like, I think running the mountains is brilliant, and it's obviously the specificity, but it's also very easy to get slow. Yes, your hiking will improve, your technical ability will improve, but actually, if you wanted to improve your VO2 max, it's significantly easier to do it at sea level, not in the mountains, because you've got options, you've got choices. But yeah, also, and to a similar extent, like, we use the treadmill a lot, and we've got a custom treadmill from Woodway. I can set the environmental conditions to be almost identical for every workout. So if I'm doing 4 by 10 minutes at 25%, for example, whether I'm doing them running or I'm doing them hiking, I can compare them to the last one. So I can see, am I actually getting better or am I staying the same? Whereas if I did a session today on a climb here, and then in a week's time, it might be really hot today, I might have a headwind the next day, it might be raining, it might be slippy. It's difficult to track your progress. So the only time that you can really track your progress and to see if you are improving or not is in the race. And funnily enough, it's too late by that point to know if your training's working. So yeah, with Scott, it's been different. Like, I don't live in the mountains. Like, I've got a 200 meter climb from the door. So yeah, 600 foot from the door. Within an hour, I've got a 400 meter climb. So a 1200 feet climb. Is it perfect? Possibly not, but I get to be at home where I'm happy, and I think a happy person makes a very good athlete. Whereas if I was away on my own for training camps the whole time, I wouldn't have a life, I wouldn't be married, it'd be pretty miserable. And yeah, for me, it's all about compromises, but then there are times in the year where my wife Sophie's the main effort, and then there are times in the year where I'm the main effort, and she's come out on this training camp with me, and it's been incredible. And it's been a complete game changer. And yeah, I think there are lots of lessons that you can learn with stop searching for perfection in training. As long as you can put things together in the race, and you've got a huge toolbox with loads of different tools that you can use come race day, then perfect. Also, I think that my final point is there's not been a single run in the last 5-6 weeks that I've been out here that I've not looked forward to doing. Whereas typically when you're running 210, so like 135, 140 miles with 45,000 feet of vert every week, you get to a point where you think, oh, another one? I really don't want to go out for 5 hours. I can't be bothered. Yesterday, it was horrendous weather here, snowing at the tops, loads of rain. You couldn't see a thing. I was so excited to go out and there were 4 of us out yesterday. I've not done a big group run like that in the mountains for a long time, and did 4 hours, and I genuinely look forward to every run. And I've never been this excited about doing a race, which I think if you can have that excitement and that energy to be excited, I think that in a race like UTMB, that can only be a good thing.
I'm sure there are a lot of people listening, watching that will laugh at this question, but I am so interested in the minutia. I have heard you say before that you travel to training camps and races with a rice cooker. How come?
It's just consistency. I think, I really want, I know what works and I know what doesn't work. And you can be incredibly fortunate in it. Adidas Terrex do an amazing job at UTMB Race Week, and they've got chalets and they've got chefs, and it's incredible, but I've not had that in my training block. I know what works for me. Why change things up when it really matters? Yes, in an ideal world, it would be incredible to have a chef out here for 6 weeks in the mountains. It would be amazing, but sadly, we're not footballers. The soccer players, I should say. I say sadly, I don't think it's a bad thing at all, but that's not the sport that we're in. So, for me, it's part of my ritual. It's controlling the controllables. I know exactly what's going in. It just makes life easy. And once you've been able to practice it, and I think that's another thing for this year for me, I've probably raced the most races running races out of anyone this year, but they've all been short, 8 kilometers, 10 kilometers. I've got to practice my race day prep, the day before prep, so many times this year that now there's no question marks. It's so easy. Everything's written down. All my timings are written down already. So race day minus 24 hours, race day minus 4 hours, 15 minutes. It's so easy because I've done that practice and I've put that work in. So why change something that doesn't necessarily work for you when you know what works? Why even consider changing things a little bit?
A couple more questions. And with this question, I'm curious if these two pieces will enter into your mid-race strategy. The first is sodium bicarb, and the second is ketone monoesters. Will you use either of those either like at Courmayeur or in the second half of the race? Because especially with a bicarb, for example, I know that the benefits, you might ride them for about 9 hours if you take them pre-race, but there is that like chance of the stomach issue late in the race. So how are you thinking about that stuff?
Practice what you preach. I've taken bicarb out on long runs with me in my pack, and then mixed it up while waiting in replicated aid stations, replicated Courmayeur in the middle of a long run, and taken bicarb, and 3 minutes later you're out hiking again, because I'm not going to take it on a descent, because Courmayeur doesn't start with a descent. You leave Courmayeur and you start hiking. So I know, okay, cool. I can train my gut and I can train my stomach to be able to tolerate that for an hour. And actually then when you get running it, I don't like bicarb and then running straight away. That's when you get stomach issues. But leaving Courmayeur, yes, you are running a little bit uphill, but it's not proper running. It's sort of a halfway house between running and hiking. And you're then hiking up to the refuge. And by the time you start running, it's been an hour and it's in your system. So yes, with bicarb, ketones, again, yes. I have done quite a lot of testing with Delta G, and there's no easy way to say they don't taste great, is the polite way to put it, but I think they are super beneficial, and it's not necessarily something that you need to have in the aid station because it's so small and light. Like you can pick and go and have it on the way. And I think combining the relationship between ketones and carbohydrate is the really not exciting one because it's pretty standard, but the fueling's the same, but just with the addition of ketones in. So I think I definitely will. The plan is to use these things pre-race and during race. Like typically I use ketones for recovery. I'm incredibly fortunate to be supported by Delta G, so I don't have to pay for any, which is a complete game changer, because they are crazy expensive, but they're crazy expensive to make as well. So I've worked closely with my physiologist, a guy called Ben Williams, who was at Ineos Cycling, and then has just got the absolute dream job. And have come up with a protocol that we that works really well. It started off as we think this will work really well because it's what is used in cycling, but now we've tested it over pretty much the whole year, and it's been really fun to experiment with and play around a little bit with. And then with the bicarb, again, I sort of don't get the benefits for 9 hours. For me, it's 6-ish hours, and I guess it will slightly depend on what the first half of the race looks like. If it's a relatively slow, relatively easy first half, I probably won't take bicarb in Courmayeur. But if it's been a harder, faster, more heart rate spikes, then I probably will take in the second half, or I will take in the second half. It's just dependent on how the race goes. And I think that's with nutrition. Like, going in with a plan is great, but something will happen that you've not necessarily fully thought about. So I think if you go in with the sole objective, right, this is exactly what I'm doing, then maybe that works, maybe that doesn't work. And again, that's the decision, being able to make the decision on the ground, being like, yes, this is what I need. And that's then when it's really important to have the crew who know you and understand you and know what the plan is, because sometimes you might not be thinking straight. It might be really cold in Courmayeur and you want to rush because the person you're running with hasn't changed their top and they've not had anything hot to eat. But actually you take that 30 seconds to drink some soup, put a new long sleeve on. You might have you've lost 30 seconds in a 20-hour race. Okay, fine. If you lose the race by 30 seconds, well, it might have been more, it might have been less, but I'd much rather take that time and make those right decisions, but make those right decisions at the time rather than being completely rigid with exactly what I'm going to do now. And I will make those decisions, but my crew will also be able to assist with those decisions when I get sort of brain fog. And again, going back to ketones, that's one of the things that they do. They give you mental clarity. So being able to, it aids you to help make those right decisions. And Delta G have done loads with Navy SEALs. Again, the similar thing, being able to perform your best when you're feeling your worst, being able to make those right decisions. You look at skill fade, the more tired you get, the more chances there are of you doing something wrong. So if you were taking penalties in soccer, for example, you would score far more at the beginning of a training session compared to at the end of a training session. And so what the military have to do, what athletes have to do, is you have to perform your best and you have to make those right decisions at the end of the race. Because it doesn't matter who's winning at Les Houches. Guaranteed, the person who gets Les Houches first is not getting the Chamonix first. If I was a betting man.
2 more questions. I want to be really respectful of your time. You've been incredibly generous. On ultrasound, you mentioned taking a test that showed how much it cost your body to move. And I think that test also helped you arrive at like the total grams of carbs per hour metric that you're going to use. Like, I think it's like 120 in that neighborhood. What is that test you're referencing? So
it's called double labeled water. That I did with Morton before States last year. And it's basically, it can measure exactly what you're putting into your body and then exactly how much energy you're using. So what your resting metabolic rate is, and then how many kilojoules and how many kilojoules you're burning to do an exercise, and how many carbohydrates your body can actually consume and use, because there's no point in taking more than your body can absorb, but there's also no point in, you wouldn't fill your car up with fuel to 3/4 full if you had a long journey to do. You'd fill it up to the top. And I think that's a fairly basic analogy. So if you know how big your tank is in your car, that's what you're going to fill it up to. You're not going to overfill it, because you're then wasting money. But also at the same time, you don't want to underdo it, because you're not going to get as far as you would like to do. So the double labeled water is a fairly standard thing. It's the most expensive bottle of water you'll ever drink. I think it's about €1,000 for 500 milliliters, like for a flask. But then that allows your body to read things because it's something to do with the makeup of the carbohydrates. You're not allowed to eat any corn product because that sort of masks some of the readings. So you take normal fueling, and I don't eat heaps of corn anyway. So so that was super interesting, and that's just given us a really good number to be able to go off and have a really good plan. So you're not guessing of being like, well, I've heard Tom has 120 grams of carbs now, that's what I should be using. It's like, well, yes, you can train your body to consume more, definitely, but where do you start? And is what you're doing, is what's right? And I guess it's just trying to reduce the question marks when you can come up with a guaranteed answer. And the plan is 120 grams, but there's no way that I'm going to do that for the whole race. There might be hours where I'm slightly more, there might be hours where I'm slightly less. But at least if you go in with a benchmark and you know what you're aiming for, like for me, the goals in the race are all process driven, and it might be quite as simple as, okay, sort of between Contamine and Courmayeur, okay, here's my nutrition bags broken down into every hour, so I know what I need to take and I can throw the little sack away after each hour. My goals for the race is to eat. How easy is that? I can control that. It doesn't matter what anyone else is doing. It doesn't matter if it's snowing or raining or it's beautiful weather. There's no one tying my hands behind my back, forcing me not to eat. I can do that. So I get that instant self-gratification when I finish a bag of food. I've achieved my goal. How amazing is that? I smile. And we go back to the Courtney Dauwalter, smiling, being happy, cheerfulness in the face of adversity. How good is that? It's an endless cycle of, I feel good, I'm going to keep fueling. I keep fueling, so I feel good.
This is the perfect segue for our last question. You just said all of your goals for UTMB are process driven, which necessarily means not really any outcome goals. And no judgment here. I'm truly curious. There might be people in the audience that say, if all of your goals are process driven and not outcome driven, does that make you less hungry, less aggressive, less eager to fight in the second half? And they might also say, like, I can't imagine other top athletes in other sports, like, for example, Michael Jordan or David Beckham saying that. So talk about just sort of like your rationale for ignoring the outcome, focusing on the process before we go.
I think if you looked at the team sports, I would agree. But I think if you looked at marathon running, it's very rare that you see someone front run an important marathon. Typically what happens is it gets to 30K and then the racing starts. And the people who have fueled the best and have run the best race to 3/4 of the way are the ones who can then pick things up. So for me, my process goals up to Trient, maybe a little bit later, I'm focusing on the process. So in the final part of the race, I am able to race. And my process goal for the final 3-4 hours of the race is to race. Because why start racing at the beginning of the race when it's kind of irrelevant? You go too aggressive. I want to be able to set the conditions for success. And if you're completely worried about, I need to win this race, I'm going to win this race, I'm going to win this race, that's great. But when someone goes off the front and starts running it 18 hours 30 pace, I can't control that. But what I can control is I can control my fueling, I can control my effort, I can regulate my core body temperature by layering systems, by changing my hat, by putting gloves on at night, by putting a windproof on, whatever it is. I can control that, and that then gives me the ability to be able to race. And then when I do race, it's not like I'm turning the tap on and it starts dripping a little bit. I'm ripping the head off a fire hydrant and it's coming bursting out. Smash, not tap. That's how we'll end it.
Tom, it is always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the generosity that you bring to every question. I'm sure there's people in the audience that have a lot to think about, and we are all very excited to watch your race unfold in a few weeks, and we wish you the best. Thank you so much.
Finn, thanks so much. No, I am very, very excited about racing as well. So thanks for having me. Keep doing the good work, and yeah, see you soon.